Nobody tells you this, but there comes a moment when a woman begins to change in a way that cannot be practiced, copied, or hurried. And the world quietly senses it before she does. At first, it looks small. Her movements slow down, not from doubt, but from a quiet certainty. Her voice holds less rush, but more weight. She no longer reaches outward to be noticed. She is noticed because she no longer reaches. This is not confidence as a show. It is not charm as a tactic. It is something older, deeper, and far more uncommon. A feminine presence that appears only when the inner world has crossed a line most people never even go near. This presence doesn't grow through polishing yourself. It grows through going down into yourself. It's born when the ego that used to cling to being seen, admired, and chosen finally starts to loosen its hold. The woman entering this phase has already lived as a projection. Her worth measured through desire, approval, attention. She has worn the masks expected of her. The agreeable daughter, the attractive partner, the always available listener. Every role once felt necessary just to belong. Every role slowly emptied her out. What changes her is not empowerment in the way it's usually sold, but a confrontation with truth. The shadow shows up first, not as obvious darkness, but as bone-deep tiredness. The tiredness of over-giving, over-explaining, of twisting her intuition into something others can easily accept. The shadow is not just bad parts, it is made of the parts of her that were never allowed to exist. Anger without apology, silence without guilt, desire without performance, grief without a neat ending. She doesn't destroy this shadow, she brings it in. And when she does, something irreversible starts. Instead of sending her feminine energy outward to be chosen, praised, or rescued, she lets it turn inward. The feminine in her becomes sovereign. Emotions stop spilling out in search of an audience. Pain becomes private, sacred, processed instead of performed. Pleasure becomes something she feels in her own body instead of something she puts on display. She starts to feel herself from the inside instead of watching herself from the outside like a character in a movie. You might know this moment. It often arrives after a disappointment that is too sharp and too honest to dramatize. A relationship that could not meet her depth. A life setup that could not hold her truth. Stoic philosophy understood this point very clearly. Marcus Aurelius wrote that peace comes not from fixing the outer world, but from putting the inner world in order. She stops bargaining with chaos. She pulls her attention back, not from bitterness, but from clarity. From the outside, she might look quieter, less reactive, less reachable. But inside, something vast is shifting. Her mind is gathering itself, no longer split apart by everyone's expectations, but slowly forming a solid center. This is where rarity begins. Most people, no matter their gender, never reach this stage, because it demands the death of psychological dependence. It asks for the courage to be misunderstood, to be unlabeled, to be temporarily alone without turning that aloneness into a punishment. The woman who steps into this space doesn't announce her evolution. She doesn't need to. Her presence speaks for her. Men feel it without knowing why. Other women feel it and respond with either deep respect or subtle resistance. It cannot be copied because it was not learned as a trick. It was earned through loss, reflection, and ruthless honesty with herself. Seneca warned that those who live by other people's opinions are never at peace. She has heard that. She has let that truth cut her open. When she walks into a room, attention shifts, not because she pulls on it, but because she doesn't. Her nervous system is calm. Her gaze is steady. Her boundaries are invisible but unmovable. She doesn't chase polarity. She simply holds it. Masculine energy responds to her, not because she acts out femininity, but because she no longer leaks it everywhere. You might notice that this presence feels ancient. It carries an echo of something old in all of us. Memories of women who were priestesses, leaders, healers. Women who did not need anyone's permission to exist. This is not running backward into the past. This is remembering. The mind remembering what was always there under the layers of training and expectation. This is the early stage of a transformation very few complete. Not because it's special or reserved, but because it refuses to compromise. It demands that she stop feeding on validation like it's food. It asks her to make friends with silence. It asks for the bravery to stop trying to be understood and start being whole. Once this journey really begins, there is no going back to who she was. There comes a point where this presence no longer feels like something she is working on, but like something that has moved in. It starts rearranging everything in her life from the inside out. It doesn't make her better than anyone. It doesn't detach her from the rest of humanity. In fact, it deepens her kindness while sharpening her clarity. She no longer confuses empathy with erasing herself. This is where many turn back, because the mind clings to familiar pain. But she keeps going. For a long time, her relationships reflected the incomplete parts of herself. She attracted intensity without safety, admiration without true understanding, pursuit without real presence. Each bond became a mirror showing her unhealed parts, especially the inner masculine, the part of her that holds boundaries, direction, and self-trust. When that inner masculine was weak, she looked to the outside world for structure. But when it grew stronger, something changed for good. The men who once shook her nervous system no longer feel magnetic. Not because they're bad, but because they no longer match her. Desire changes frequency when the inner world integrates. Attraction grows quieter, more careful, rooted in recognition instead of longing. Epictetus said freedom is not found by feeding desire, but by loosening its hold over you. She doesn't erase desire. She refines it. She lets it be led by alignment, not by emptiness. This refinement changes her voice. She no longer over-explains her feelings. She trusts that they are real even if nobody gets them. Her words become fewer, but they land. Silence turns into a language she uses with ease. Not as punishment, not as a trick, just as truth. When something is wrong, her body knows before her mind starts to argue. Once, trauma taught her to ignore that wisdom. Healing brings her back to it. You can feel this shift when she is tested. Conflict no longer sends her into collapse or attack. There is a pause, a breath, a listening inward. Depth meets discipline. Where Marcus Aurelius described standing like a cliff that waves crash against and fall back, she now stands that way inside herself. This is not emotional freezing. It is emotional ownership. She lets herself feel without letting feelings steer the ship. The shadow she once feared now serves her. Her anger sets boundaries. Her sadness has dignity. Her desire has direction. She doesn't throw parts of herself away to keep surface peace. She lets all her inner voices exist without tearing her apart. Others feel this inner coherence. They might not have words for it, but their bodies respond. Conversations with her slow down. People drop their walls. Truth rises without being forced. This is not charm used to control. It is presence that gives permission. People feel more like themselves around her, even when that self is uncomfortable. She no longer soaks up other people's emotions as her job to fix. She watches without drowning. This is why her energy feels rare. It cannot live alongside constant self-betrayal. It insists that she disappoint others before she abandons herself. Seneca said, "No one is free who is a slave to their need for approval." She has gently set that need down, like putting down a weight that once felt necessary, but is now simply too heavy. There is grief in this phase. The grief of seeing how long she lived cut off from her own authority. The grief of relationships that cannot follow her into this deeper place. She does not turn this grief into theater. She honors it quietly. Grief becomes soil, not a tomb. From it, something solid grows. You might feel this happening in you. A resistance to small talk, a pulling away from fake closeness, a growing refusal to tolerate emotional chaos dressed up as passion. This is not numbness. This is discernment taking shape. The nervous system recalibrates when it no longer needs to stay on high alert to be loved. As this settles, her sense of time changes. She is no longer racing toward titles, milestones, or achievements to confirm her worth. She stops bargaining with fate for proof she is enough. Life stops feeling like something being done to her and starts feeling like something that moves with her. This is not the finish line. This is the deepening. What comes next is a face-to-face meeting with meaning itself. What is left when admiration fades? When roles fall away? When even identity begins to soften? Very few walk beyond this point because it asks a final, quiet question. Who are you when no one is watching you, needing you, or choosing you? She is about to find out. As she moves further inward, the world around her starts to shift in ways that can feel strange. Not because she is forcing outcomes, but because she is no longer blocking them. Life becomes quieter, not empty, exact. What truly belongs comes toward her. What does not slowly falls away without drama. This is where that rare feminine presence becomes unmistakable. It's no longer just something people feel in conversation. It shapes how she meets existence itself. She is no longer shaped by pure reaction. She no longer lives at the mercy of moods, messages, or fleeting moments. The inner masculine in her now stands as a steady axis. It doesn't crush her femininity, it protects it. Boundaries stop feeling like walls and start feeling like structure. Inside that structure, her softness is finally safe. The feminine in her is no longer leaking out, begging to be held. And the masculine in her is no longer rigid or forced from the outside. They move together. This is why her presence feels calm yet powerful, open yet solid. People sometimes confuse this with not caring. It's the opposite. She is deeply involved with life, just not tangled in it. Stoic wisdom echoes here. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that events are neutral. It is judgment that disturbs the soul. She has learned this not as a quote, but as experience. Disappointment no longer crushes her identity. Praise no longer inflates it. She meets both with the same steady awareness. Emotional regulation becomes natural, not because she shuts feelings down, but because she trusts her capacity to hold them. This trust changes how she loves. Love is no longer a stage for self-erasure or self-proof. She doesn't disappear into someone else's needs. She also doesn't use independence as armor. She can stay close to others while staying close to herself. For people who are used to calling chaos connection, this can feel strange, even unnerving. Some will try to drag her back into old patterns. They test her edges. They create drama. They confuse intensity with depth. She doesn't bite. Not because she's cold, but because she sees clearly now. You may notice the same clarity rising in you. A tiredness with inconsistency. A boredom with emotional games. A longing for resonance over excitement. A pull toward what is steady instead of what is loud. This woman accepts that true individuality will cost her the comfort of the crowd. Not with arrogance, but with humility. She understands that being alone is not the same as being abandoned when that aloneness is filled with meaning. At this point, her intuition sharpens, not as fantasy, but as embodied wisdom. The body stops being a battleground and becomes an ally. Trauma once cut this communication and forced her to override herself to survive. Healing turns the signal back on. Now, when something feels wrong, she doesn't argue with that signal. When something feels right, she doesn't rush to tear it down. She lets her knowing stand. Others sense this and react in their own ways. Some feel steady around her. Others feel exposed. Her presence quietly reflects back unresolved pieces in others, not to shame them, but simply because integration always shines light. She doesn't rush to correct their stories about her. She doesn't shrink herself to make them more comfortable. She lets them feel what they feel. This letting go is power, not power over anyone else. Power over self. Seneca said the greatest empire is to have command over oneself. She rules her inner world with fairness, not force. She doesn't punish herself for having emotions. She also doesn't indulge every impulse that threatens her long-term peace. Discipline becomes a form of self-respect instead of self-rejection. There is a sacred kind of loneliness here that few speak about. The loneliness of no longer being constantly available, of no longer being able to unsee unhealthy dynamics, of outgrowing spaces that once felt like home. She doesn't turn this loneliness into a story of failure. She understands it as a crossing, a space between old skins and a new self. Something essential is pulling itself together inside her. This is when her presence begins to feel almost timeless, less shaped by trends, less shaken by noise. She moves to her own internal rhythm, a rhythm that does not ask for permission. That rhythm is what older traditions would have called feminine authority. Not about domination, but about coherence. Not about being the loudest, but about carrying weight. As this gravity settles, she steps up to the final edgy, meaning beyond identity. The question stops being, who am I becoming? And shifts into, how do I want to exist? Here, presence becomes purpose, and purpose becomes peace. This is where striving quietly falls away, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because her effort is no longer wasted on proving her worth. She isn't trying to earn a place in the world anymore. She is simply living in it. Meaning does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives as rightness. A steady sense that she is where she needs to be, even if her situation is not perfect. From the outside, her days may look ordinary. She works. She speaks. She moves through tasks like anyone else. But under everything is a stillness. She is no longer fighting time. Waiting doesn't shake her. Not knowing what comes next doesn't dissolve her sense of value. She understands, as the Stoics taught, that control is limited to her judgment and her actions, never the results. This frees huge amounts of energy that anxiety used to steal. At this point, that rare feminine presence almost disappears from view because it no longer needs to be seen to be real. She is not arranging herself for an audience. She is not asking, how do I look to them? Her nervous system rests inside itself. Others feel this rest as safety. And not everyone is ready for that. Safety can be confronting for people who only know chaos. Some read her peace as distance. Some see in her what they have been running from in themselves. She lets them. She doesn't chase their understanding. She allows their stories about her to move past without absorbing them. This is freedom from the need for external validation, not coldness, independence. Praise becomes pleasant, not necessary. Criticism becomes data, not a wound. In love, this changes everything. She no longer experiences loss as the end of herself. Attachment no longer defines who she is. When love is present, she meets it fully. When it leaves, she grieves deeply but does not lose herself. It's not that she loves less. She simply loves without disappearing. The feminine in her is no longer begging, proving, or performing. It is choosing. You may feel this in you too, the quiet refusal to chase, the instinct to pause instead of run after someone. The solid sense that being chosen means nothing if it requires you to betray yourself. She has chosen to live the life inside her, even when that meant disappointing what others wanted from her. Her presence now carries an emotional authority that cannot be argued away. She doesn't work to persuade. She doesn't over-explain herself into safety. She says what is true and lets people react however they will. Very few people ever fully embody this state because it demands that you sit in discomfort without numbing it right away. It asks you to release roles that once guaranteed belonging. There's a rebirth here, but it doesn't look like a movie scene full of flames and drama. It is quieter, gentler. One day she realizes she is no longer asking for permission to exist as she is. The harsh inner judge has become more of a guide. The inner child feels held, not exposed. The once fragmented mind now moves as a whole. She is not perfect. She still feels sadness, anger, longing. But these emotions now move through a stable center instead of knocking it down. She trusts that she can feel anything without being destroyed by it. That trust is the ground of her peace. From this place, contribution replaces proving. She stops asking, "How can I be seen?" and starts asking, "How can I give without losing myself?" Creativity flows not as performance, but as expression. Relationships deepen not from drama, but from simple presence. Life becomes less about the story she tells